everyone, my name is Mariah Woods Wells. I will be presenting the material for week 3, and this will be covering chapter 2, entitled The Soviet System and Its Demise. The information presented in this chapter is important to the course in a whole because it presents the history and how the Soviet system came to be. According to our textbook, this chapter provides a summary overview of the Russian Rime before the communists came to power, followed by a description of the Soviet system and its breakdown. So basically, the way that I understand this is that this chapter is going to be covering exactly what the Soviet system is and everybody and everything that was involved with it. Here are some key terms and concepts for the chapter. These terms and concepts are what really pointed out for me, and they are autocratic, patrimonialism, absolutism, socialism, Soviets, communism, Marxism, Leninism, federalism, decentralization, republic level, social contract. In the following slide, I will be defining these terms and concepts. Now the definition are pretty much simple, and I gathered these from the reading. Autocratic means that it was ruled by a hierarchy monarch whose power was unlimited by any constitution. Patrimonialism, the ruler treated his realm as property that he owned rather than a political community consisting of individuals and groups with distinct rights and interests. Also, just to point out, please bear with me as I do not have the greatest pronunciation of these words. Now to continue. Absolutism. The Tsar aspired to wield absolute power over the subjects of the realm. Socialism. The elimination of private property in some or all of the means of production of a society. Definitions continued. Marxism, form of communist doctrine. Leninism was named after the person that brought this about, and this is a brand of Marxism developed by Lenin, who was a ruler of Russia for a short period of time. Soviets are elected councils through which workers and peasants could voice their desires. Communism is the economic system or to a type of political regime. Federalism. This was used to give symbolic rights to ethnic minorities. Decentralization, capture control over state resources for their own political benefit rather than to make more productive use of them. So in short, this is what I understood, is that a person would take control over a particular state's resources, and rather than use them for the country in a whole, they would only use them to make themselves seem better in political power. Going on. Republic level. These are leaders who played the ethnic card in the behind-the-scenes bureaucratic bargaining. Social contract is a bond of reciprocal dependence between workers and managers. The people that are listed are the people who were once rulers of Russia. As going down the list, they each came one after another. They were each other's successors. The important people: Vladimir Lenin, Joseph Stalin, Nikita Khrushchev, Leonid Brezhnev, Yuri Andropov, Konstantin Chernovsky, Mikhail Gorbachev, and Boris Yeltsin. Now I will be explaining when these people were in power and a little bit of what they did while they were in power. Vladimir Lenin was in power from 1917 to 1924. He was born in 1970. He formed the Russian Communist Party and headed the Soviet Russian government after the revolution. It was Vladimir who separated the people between Soviets and communists. Lenin's successor was Joseph Stalin. Joseph Stalin was in power from 1924 to 1953. He was born in 1979. Something that I found kind of disturbing as well as interesting about Stalin was the fact that he employed mass terror to everyone around him. He killed millions of Soviet citizens through executions, induced famine, forced labor under inhumane conditions, and deportations. The next person is Nikita Khrushchev. Sorry, I do not know how to pronounce the last name. But Nikita was in power from 1953 to 1964. He was Stalin's successor. He had a problem with defining a new and more institutionalized framework for ruling the state. One of the problems with Nikita was that he lacked Stalin's unchallengeable power. And so, sorry about that. I got a little jumbled up in my words. But Nikita lacked Stalin's unchallengeable power. So, there was an agreement made that because they wanted to be less dependent on fear and more on popular consent without having to relinquish their power, they made the system less personalistic and more rule governed. The next person that came into power was Leonid Brezhnev. He was in power from 1964 to 1982. He was Nikita's successor, and the way this came to be is because he was the person that was responsible for the conspiracy against Nikita, and he stayed into power until he died in 1982. Important people continued. The next person that came into power was Yuri Andropov. He was in power from 1982 to 1984. As you can see, This was a very short time, and this was because he was a very ill man. Much of his ruling was done from his hospital bed, and he stayed there until he died in 1984. A little bit about Yuri Andropov. He was the chairman of the KGB, and he was the secretary of the CPSU Central Committee. Once he died in 1984, he was succeeded by another member that was very ill himself, and that was Konstantin Sharonoko. Sharonoko was a part of Yuri's personnel clientele. He was in power just from 1984 to 1985. Then, of course, the senior leadership took notice that there had been a string of people that were dying, and they didn't want to seem weak to everyone else around the world. So they decided that the next person in power would need to be much younger, more dynamic, and open-minded. And that was when the youngest member came into power, and his name was Mikhail Gorbachev. He came into power in 1985, and that was only after Konstantin died. Gorbachev was named General Secretary of the party. According to our textbook, he needed to build a broader base of support in the Politburo for a policy of reform. To help persuade his colleagues to embark on real reform, Gorbachev needed to generate an elite perception of impending crisis in order to overcome his colleagues' reluctance to accept the risk of major reform. Gorbachev moved rapidly to consolidate his own power using the General Secretary's power over the appointment of ranking elites. He not only stripped power away from the Bernacchi-era old guard, but he also began transferring power away from the Communist Party altogether. Gorbachev also made use of the party's control of national policy to set new directions in domestic and foreign policy. Gorbachev not only called for policy reform, but he also made far-reaching institutional changes in the economy and political system. I think that it was Gorbachev who made the biggest dent in Russia's Soviet system and its demise. The person that came after Gorbachev was Boris Yeltsin, and he came into power in 1990. The Congress narrowly selected Boris Yeltsin chairman of the Russian Supreme Soviet in June 1990. And that's from the textbook. Just to read two of the last paragraphs that I found very important for this entire chapter is: the winter of 1990 to 1991 saw an intense political struggle between Gorbachev and Yeltsin. Gorbachev fought to hold on to his power and the central leadership while maneuvering to defeat Yeltsin. By April 1991, Yeltsin had defeated the conservative forces in the Russian parliament, and Gorbachev had failed to force Yeltsin out. Gorbachev had to accept Russia's sovereign status within the Federal Union. Gorbachev then sought out to find terms for a new federal or confederal union that would be acceptable to Yeltsin and the Russian leadership, as well as to the leaders of the other republics. He initiated negotiations with the Republic leaders aimed at drafting a new constitution framework for